Hello, I'm Maurice Powell. Welcome to A Little Light Music, Manx Radio's regular Thursday evening classical music hour. And I'm going to begin this evening's programme with one of the staples of the British light music genre, Eric Coates' march Calling All Workers, written in 1940, partly to add a bit of cheerfulness to all the workers in the wartime factories. After the war, it became the signature tune for many years for a very popular radio programme, Music While You Work. So, there's nothing more to be said. Eric Coates, Calling All Workers. Wonderful march, that Eric Coates is Calling All Workers. Coates just seems to capture the right mood and everything for all his marches. Wonderful composer, rightly known, I think, as the Prince of light music, maybe even the King of light music. Perhaps Haydn Wood, our very own Haydn Wood, is the Prince of light music. But nevertheless, a wonderful march. Now, something a little bit more peaceful. I'm going to go back a couple of centuries, if not more, to the music of Marcello, a Venetian contemporary of Vivaldi. and Albinoni. So if you like the music of Vivaldi or of Handel or of Bach, we're in the right sort of territory here. Very lyrical music at Marcello. He wrote a lot of concertos, but also oratorios and some operas. And I have recordings of one or two, and they're exceedingly good. If you like Baroque opera, again of the sort of Vivaldi and Handel type, but very, very interesting. As I say, he had this wonderful lyrical gift, and that gift is shown here in one of his most famous pieces. This is the Adagio from his oboe concerto in D minor. The Adagio from Marcello's Oboe Concerto in D minor. Now, a genuine, authentic Baroque Adagio, unlike that dreadful thing they've attached poor old Albinoni's name to, which contains not a single note that he actually wrote. Music of Marcello. We'll come back to it from time to time. There's lots of wonderful things in just like that. And now we need something to sit back and relax to for 10 minutes or so. And I've chosen a piece by Tchaikovsky, which is very little known, hardly ever played, and I suspect most of you will not have heard. I'm going to dedicate this piece, or I'm going to play this piece, for an ex-neighbour of mine, Keith, in Ramsey. Now, I bumped into Keith the other day. As I say, he's an ex-neighbour of mine. And I know he listens to my programme regularly, so that means you're a loyal fan, Keith. Thank you very much indeed, and reward in heaven. So I'm going to play this piece. I don't exactly know what Keith's musical tastes are, but if he listens to my programme, he clearly has taste. But you might enjoy this, an unusual piece. Now, Tchaikovsky wrote this originally in 1865 for a small student orchestra, but the following year he revised it very considerably, virtually doubling its size, adding extra instruments, and it received its premiere in this revised version, conducted by the famous Nikolai Rubinstein for a Russian Music Society concert in Moscow. It's a work you will very rarely, if ever, encounter in the concert hall, and yet it's wonderful. I love the opening with a dreamy horn solo. So, for my ex-neighbour, Keith, Tchaikovsky, Overture in F major. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I don't think I've ever played that in this series of programmes before. And as I say, it's not likely to be encountered in the concert hall. An early orchestral work by Tchaikovsky, the overture in F major. Well, all the fingerprints of the mature Tchaikovsky are there, perhaps in a sort of a slightly more restrained, more lyrical form. But I think that's a very attractive piece. I'm going to listen to that again, perhaps tomorrow when I'm sort of working away on the computer, and just to see how it comes over a day later. But I thought it was a fascinating piece with some lovely touches in it. So we need something a little less histrionic, and the music of Charles Williams comes to mind, one of the great light music composers. He was a violinist in many theatre and cinema orchestras in the 1920s and eventually became a musical director in London's Theatreland. He's famous, of course, for writing the wonderful Dream of Olwen, a once popular piece, and even more so for The Devil's Gallop, which became the theme music for the radio series Dick Barton. The piece I'm going to play for you now is The Old Clockmaker, which again found a new lease of life as the theme tune for a radio programme, Jennings at School. Charles Williams, The Old Clockmaker. The music of Charles Williams, The Old Clockmaker. Now let's have a little bit of vocal music of one of my favourite English tenors, Richard Lewis. He was born Thomas, a Welsh family in Manchester. he had an older brother also called Thomas who worked on the railways. He was known as Thomas the Tank Engine. And there was a younger sister, Mivanwi, who, to keep things simple in the family, was also known as Thomas. I'm just kidding. Nevertheless, he decided that Thomas, and please forgive me all the Thomases out there, was not quite the right name for an opera singer. In the 1940s, he sang with Carl Rosa, having just come out of the Royal Manchester College of Music. He recorded various roles for Benjamin Britten. He sang at Glyndebourne, at Covent Garden, at Sadler's Wells. I may have heard him at Sadler's Wells in the early 1960s. In the role of Idomeneo in Mozart's opera of the same name. He certainly recorded it shortly afterwards. So let's hear him sing some Handel. He made his name really in Messiah, and then of course Elijah, Dream of Gerontius, and so on and so forth. But for Handel, I've chosen the wonderful aria "Waft Her Angels" from Handel's last oratorio, Jephthah. The story here is a pitiful one, really. Jephthah makes a vow that if he is successful in battle, he will sacrifice the first person he sees when he reaches home. Now, why do they do that? Do they not realise it's bound to end in disaster? And it does, because the first person he meets upon coming home is his beautiful daughter. Well, a vow is a vow, and as he prepares to sacrifice her, he sings this wonderful aria, "Waft her angels through the skies, far above the azure plain." A wonderful aria by Handel from his last oratorio, Jephthah, Waft Her Angels Through the Skies. I don't think I've ever heard it sung better than that, and by the Welsh tenor Richard Lewis, recorded in 1957 with Sir Malcolm Sargent, of all people, conducting the orchestra. Now, you're probably wondering how it all panned out. Well, you'll be glad to know that God sent down one of those angel chappies with a message, and there was a reprieve. Jephthah had proved his loyalty, and his daughter would be saved, providing she agreed to be locked away as a perpetual virgin. Now, leaving aside the question of why the Bible is so obsessed with virgins, nevertheless, it was probably a good deal for Jephthah's daughter. I mean, it's marginally better being locked away as a perpetual virgin than being murdered on a whim by your father, I suppose. Let's face it, folks, there are lots of things in the good book which we really don't understand. Moving on to something totally different and a little bit of jazz. Well, I virtually never play jazz in this programme because obviously there are programmes that deal with jazz, and there are experts here who know far more about it than I do. Well, I'm not going to talk about the jazz, except to say this is one of Scarlatti's sonatas for keyboard. It's the one in F sharp minor, but it's been arranged by Jacques Lussier. Do you remember Jacques Lussier? This is the Jacques Lussier trio, piano, bass and drums. I seem to remember a disc called Playbark back in the 1960s. I may have got that wrong. Basically, he used to play wonderful arrangements of Bach and other Baroque pieces with a slightly jazzy accompaniment, and they were absolutely wonderful. This particular piece was recorded in Paris in 2001. So, Domenico Scarlatti, by the way, he wrote over 600 keyboard sonatas. This is the sonata in F sharp minor, realised by Jacques Lussier. So, just a brief little interlude there with a jazzy flavour. It's one of Scarlatti's 600 or so keyboard sonatas, one in F sharp minor, realised by the Jacques Lussier trio. One thing about Scarlatti, he may have written over 600 keyboard sonatas, and they have all been recorded several times. You could buy the whole lot for a very modest outlay these days, but none of them outstay their welcome, and they're full of wonderful things, even sort of Spanish guitar effects and all sorts of things. He crossed hands. Domenico Scarlatti is one of the most formidable keyboard players of his age, would have given even Bach a run for his money, I think. Let's move on to the music of Haydn, and I'm going to play a movement, or two short movements, from one of his late masses. The mass in question is known as Missa in Tempore Belli, Mass in Time of War, sometimes known as the Kettle Drum Mass. I'm going to play the Agnus Dei and the Dona Nobis Pacem, during which the drum part becomes ever more menacing. Mass in time of war, or even Mass in time of fear, possibly. It was first performed in December 1796 for the name day of the Princess Maria Hermenegild, because at that time, although Haydn had virtually retired and could act as a freelance musician and travel anywhere, he was still nominally engaged by the Esterházy family, but his only real engagement each year was to write a splendid mass for the name day of this princess. All of the masses are absolutely fantastic. Perhaps the best known one is the Nelson Mass, but this one, the Kettle Drum Mass, is equally fine. So here we have the Agnus Dei and the Dona Nobis Pacem. The last two sections there, Agnus Dei and Dona Nobis Pacem from Haydn's splendid Missa in Tempore Belli, the kettle drum mass or mass in time of war. Something a little bit calming now as we near the end of the programme, and some Bach, I think, Johann Sebastian that is. I'm going to play the Adagio from his keyboard concerto in D major. Bach wrote all of his keyboard work, except those for organ, of course, for the harpsichord, but here it's played on a piano by the great Austrian pianist Andras Schiff with the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. The wonderful Adagio from Bach's keyboard concerto in D major, played there for us by Andras Schiff. And that brings us to the end of the programme. I hope you've enjoyed my selection and will join me again next Thursday at 9. We need something to play us out with, and I think another of the most famous light music pieces will fit the bill. This is Elizabethan Serenade by Ronald Beans. Till next Thursday, goodbye.